All right, everybody, welcome back to Relaxed and Fast. We're doing a little bit of a different format today. We have Carter and Hope joining me, and Kettle. Kettle is curled up on the couch. It is spring break, so we figured we would record an episode. So we'll get started here. What do we want to talk about?
That's a great question. Do you want Carter to introduce himself first?
Yeah, we could do that.
He's new to the podcast.
Hi guys, I'm Carter. I graduated back in the spring. Now I am in my first year of podiatric med school at Kent State. And just glad to be on the podcast.
Another old alumni. We don't have the young guys here today.
Yep. They were too busy doing other stuff. So
I guess they get a pass. You want to talk about one of your topics? Or...
Sure, I don't care. Which one do you want to go with, Carter?
I like either, I think one you said was training for different groups.
Okay.
Mid-distance versus distance, or the philosophy of racing every weekend.
Which one do you want to go with? We can do both. We could do two.
I say let's start with racing every weekend.
Okay.
Carter's got big feelings about this one.
So I recently have joined, I had a year left of eligibility. I didn't run it all freshman year. I was injured the entirety of it. So graduating BW, I had a full year of eligibility left. And going to school at Kent State for med school, I decided to join the track team. So I started for indoor track. I'll run outdoor track, and then as well as I'll race cross country. And it's very different coming from BW, where we raced every weekend, to now I race once every 3 weeks. It's just very different coaching philosophy on it. So, yeah.
When we're talking about racing often, are we talking about are we getting into doubling on the same weekends, or this is just the fact that we race as a program every weekend?
I think it could be both, because I think both of those things are fairly unique to our program. And so I guess we, first and foremost, we start with the who, what, when, where. And so at the end of cross country, and even sometimes during cross country, we'll sit down and I have a big Excel sheet that has all of the athletes in a row. And then going across the top, we have all of the different meets, and we just kind of go through and start with the question of what is your main goal for conference, and then kind of work backwards from there. When you really start to break it down, this season isn't very long. I think we have 6 weeks for indoor and around 7 weeks for outdoor. And so when we're trying to qualify for All Ohio, we're trying to qualify for conference, we're hopefully trying to qualify for nationals, it just doesn't give you a ton of opportunities to race. From my personal experience, I always felt like I raced better off of racing than I raced off of workouts. And so that has part to do why we race a little bit more than not. And so when you take all of those things and kind of combine them in, I think it's important to get races under your belt, especially for the mid-distance people. Having more reps at 800s and 1500s and miles, I think it takes a while to kind of remember what it's like to hurt like that during a race. And so getting a bunch of reps at doing that is important. Now, I am not a believer in we're going to run the same event every weekend. And so we will bounce all over the place with our races, knowing that, okay, if we're trying to run the mile at All Ohio, or we're trying to run the mile at conference, then okay, where does the mile sit? If you're somebody that is a top miler, you probably could be a legit leg of a DMR. And then you could probably also be a really good or have an opportunity to run in either like 1,000 or an 800 for our conference meet. And so you need to run those events at some point in time during the season to try to get into the fast heats and so on and so forth. And so most of the time for our mid-distance people, we will race up to start the season. So we'll run either a 5K or a 3K to kind of get started on the season. And then we might come down and run, a mile, a double the next week where we go mile 1,000 to try to knock some of those events off, and then run like an 800 4x4. Well, we pretty much run the 4x. Everybody runs 4x4 every week.
That is the BW philosophy. We run no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if we have 3 heats and the last 4x4 only has 3 people on it, we all run the 4x4. That is like a BW thing that we're known for at meets.
It's always funny, the freshmen 5K runners, their first meet, they'll get done with the 5K and be like, Coach really isn't going to make me run a 4x4, is he? And all the upperclassmen are like, hey, you should probably just keep your spikes on and get ready to go.
There's always like a second wave of hope when they realize there's only 3 on their relay. Well, there's only 3 of us. We don't have a 4th person. And we're like, so you just get DQ'd. Like, it's fine.
Yeah,
run your 400.
We're just getting splits. Well, there's only one. Well, looks like you're running the first leg there, homeboy. And so depending on the meet, we'll do that as well. If it's a little bit bigger meet, we usually won't have just one person run. But at some of the smaller meets, our home meets, things of that nature, we will definitely have multiple heats. I think at one point I entered up to 6 different 4x4s this year.
The one year at the Sparky, we were the only team doing 4x4s, and we didn't mix gender because they didn't matter anyways.
That was the COVID year.
Sorry, I sent you off on the 4x4.
No.
Doubling.
And so that's kind of how we start the process. And then with the distance kids, with the distance kids, I don't believe in running the 5K or the 10K every weekend. Like that's not a thing you want to do, or even like steeple 5K, 10K. Like running those back to back to back is tough. Now I have had people run steeple 800 in the same meet, and I've had people run steeple 400 hurdles in the same meet. But I usually won't have them run the steeple on back to back weeks unless they have to hit a qualifier or we're chasing a national time or something along those lines. And kind of the same with the 5K and the same with the 10K especially. We usually only get like 1 or 2 cracks at a 10K per season and year. But in between those races, we will run 15s and 8s and kind of use those as tune-ups to get ready to go race the next weekend. So
I feel like it's fair to say it's like more, I don't want to say obscure events, but like you run the weird events at the beginning of the season, and then as we get closer is when it gets into maybe that like you run the 800 2 weeks in a row, or the conference into Twilight's an exception.
Yeah.
As we get closer towards the end, I think it gets more specific to what you do more often.
Yeah.
Where we do the like more random things at the beginning of the season. And I feel like it kind of helps take the pressure off of what you're ripping at the beginning of the season, the expectations versus reality of training.
Exactly, and that's purposeful in how we do it. And my brain went to Alyssa, her senior year. And so in the meantime, we're always training towards whatever the goal is of what you want to run at conference or nationals. And so, Carter was always trying to run the 3K, 5K. Hope is usually trying to run everything. The 500, the mile, the 800 or the 1500, 800, 4x8 DMR, whatever. So as that is going on, Carter might be racing the 15-8 double, 4x4 triple, but we're still running workouts to get him ready for the 5K. And so we're not doing a ton of specific work to get him ready to run a 15 or an 8. We just use those 15s, 8s, 4x4s to get them ready to race and just remember what it feels like to race.
I'm talking about, like, specifically for you, for someone who doesn't have a kick, like how that kind of translates, like the importance of you running an 8 every once in a while or a mile for a 5K, 10K.
Yeah, it really helped me for, like, even just thinking about, like, wanting to progress in a 5K for, like, from the beginning to the end of the season, or from whatever goal I was chasing of a sub 15, of, like, thinking about having to cut off 7 seconds per mile in the 5K seems a little daunting, especially because I'm not a miler, but then getting to run an 8 in a mile and then running some pretty, for myself, quick times, and thinking, like, well, this is like 20 seconds faster per mile than I have to go in my 5K. So then it makes it seem a little less challenging, but it is always fun because then it just shows your strength. But for sure, as someone who doesn't have a kick, you just have to go out at your pace and you just hold your pace. And usually the senior year it ended up being I was leading some mile and 800 races that I definitely shouldn't have been leading. But I ran my same pace for about the whole race until everybody kicked me down the last 200. But that's just where the strength comes into play. But it gives you confidence knowing, like, I can still run fast, and going to up in distance is like, this is slower than a mile, and I was able to run a mile pretty strong. So that always helped me, knowing, like, I can still run fast. I might not be able to kick people down, but I can still run fast and I can run hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also think your kick got better as you went along too.
As someone coming in who couldn't break 30 in a 200, to where at the end of workouts senior year I could run almost all my 200s in the 27, 28 range.
Yeah.
It definitely improved. Those Monday speed days and hills definitely helped.
I still think I have you. But
You
that's okay.
probably do.
I mean, I guess the reverse of that's me having to run a 10K or a 5K. It makes an 800 miles seem a lot shorter. Like, not a speed thing, but man, am I thankful for 2 laps after running 25 laps on a 10K. That it's just a different kind of mental toughness the other way. It's interesting balance.
And it puts less pressure on, for me running a mile and 8. I know I'm not going to run the mile or 8 at a conference meet or anything like that, but might as well give it my best shot I can. It makes the less pressure on the race, and you usually compete better and you compete well when you don't put so much pressure on yourself for one single race or anything like that.
When I was at McPherson, we did that all the time. Like, that was kind of where that started for me, because that was the first time I was a head coach. And we raced a lot there too. And Seha would, he would run 15-8 4x4 on a Saturday the week before his big 10Ks. And he would do it. And usually what we found was, I think back to we would run at Wichita State, and he broke 4 minutes for the first time on that Thursday or Friday night. And then the next week came back and ran essentially 30 flat in the 10K. And so, and Emily Johnson is another one from Sac State that kind of comes to mind, and she did the same thing. She PR'd 15-8 4x4, and then the next week ran a pretty big PR down at San Francisco. And so I think it's just, gets you into the right racing mindset. 10 days out from the big race, you're doing your workout, and then you're just using that as kind of your tune-up. But I think another really big thing, and Hope and I have talked about this a lot, is I think it's really hard to double, triple, quad at a conference meet when you don't do it at all during the year. And so you're showing up to conference and you're trying to run the 5K, 10K, or you're trying to run, the 4x8, 15-8 triple on 2 different days, or even more importantly, you're going to nationals and you're trying to run a prelim and a final on back-to-back days, and you're trying to do that at a really high level. If you're not used to doing that, I think that can be a really difficult thing to do. And so part of the reason that we do that is to try to get everybody ready to go run at a conference meet and to be prepared to carry a big load at a conference meet. And you can even look at like Dylan from last year to this year, Sam from his freshman, sophomore year to this year. And we're still not quite where I think all of us want to be, but they definitely ran better in their secondary and third events of the weekend. Now they got to the 4x4, and that was challenging to say the least. But I think doing some of these other doing it during the season helps them tremendously.
I mean, it is something we specifically talked about. Like after my freshman year, I got a day in between, and like outdoor, and then that sophomore indoor. Turn around those back-to-back miles. Like indoor nationals is tough. Like
Yep.
especially if you try to do more than one event, you don't get that buffer day.
Yeah.
And we did specifically like how can we figure this out to a point. I was running 2 meets in the same weekend sometimes of trying to learn what that feels like, because you go from not doing that to all of a sudden you get to championship and you have to do it, like at the conference level, everything. So it's interesting. I think it shows. We've always talked about that it's something that sets us apart at the conference meet, that we're able to come back and double in all of those races. I don't know, it's something I think sets our program apart. But I think there's kind of a misconception with the pressure associated to racing every weekend with us. This past weekend, I got on the line and tried to run a national qualifying time, and I think about the pressure for that one race and that one meet and what it would be like if I was doing that every weekend. How tough it is when people only race 3 times and they have to get on the line and try to run a conference time or try to run a national time. I think people think that we have that mental load and that mental stress on every weekend, but we don't, because we have those fun weekends where we run a 400 and a 200 or something else like that takes some of that mental load off.
Yeah. Routine is really big, right? And so we talk about that a lot. We talk about the routine of getting ready for the race, what you need to do leading into the race. And anytime we do our warm-up the same on workout days as we do on race days, because that's important. That makes you feel more comfortable. And I think the more times that you can go through that race routine, the more comfortable you're going to get in those situations, regardless of the extra pressure of what type of meet you are at. And so I think that is all part of kind of the master plan a little bit of why we try to race a little bit more. I also think I think a lot of it just comes back to there's no other pain like racing, and there's no more specific thing you can do to get ready to race than racing. And so the more times that you can do that, the better off you're going to be with it. And having to double and triple and do all of those things at conference, like it's really important to get reps before you're going into the big meet and trying to pull that out. And I always think about, are other coaches just that much smarter than me that they can do those things in workouts and mimic those things in workouts? But we also don't back off on weeks where we're racing. And I think there are times where I will actually do things with the who, what, when, where to set up workouts as well. And so, yeah, we might have a primary event that we're trying to hit a mark in, but then we're also going to add other things behind it to get you ready to do a speed endurance workout like a week or 2 later type of thing as well. So,
absolutely. I think the routine thing's huge. It makes it so that's just what we do on Saturdays. Like that's just I know what I'm having for breakfast. I know what I'm having for dinner on Thursday nights. Like that, there's just something about that adds a level of comfort to the racing, that it just becomes normal, especially after 4 years of doing that. Like there's just something, I think it'd feel weird not to. Like it feels weird not racing, like this weekend. But I think what you were pointing at with the us running workouts and how that sets up is also a misconception that people have with racing every weekend, is that we're taking those weeks off or doing constant tune-ups. Like other programs take a race weekend off, but then they hit a big workout. Like we're still hitting those big workouts without taking those tune-up days. We just roll through it. Like that's part of how we roll.
Yeah, and we rarely do the tune-up workouts, and I think we balance it probably a little bit better indoors than we do outdoors. There's just times outdoors where we just have to run some mega workouts to be ready to go for conference. And so, the Jesse Owen / Sparky weekend is usually a pretty rough weekend because that is also 10 days out from conference. So we do a huge workout on Tuesday and then we try to race again on Friday. Sometimes that just doesn't go well. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And we kind of have to roll with it regardless. And I also think back to Alyssa's senior year. Our whole plan was for her to run the 3K and the 5K at the national meet. And our workouts are going well. We felt like she was in 17 flat-ish shape and 10 flat-ish shape. I think she ran like 10:07 or 10:08 pretty at the Dr. T meet. And she had a race where she went out and 16:40 pace and it did not go great for the last K or whatever. But the next day she came back and ran 5:04 in the mile by herself at All Ohio and won from gun to tape. And on that ride home, I essentially started to go back and look at what it took to qualify to nationals, what it took to make the final, and what it took to be an All-American, and in the mile, the 3K, and the 5K. And I called her up to the front of the bus and just said, here's the research I just did. Here's what you just did this past weekend. You are ready to run a sub 5-minute mile. And at that point in time, if you run sub 5 minute in the mile, you were going to be an All-American. And that's the route we ended up going. And I think something else that is fairly unique to our program is I don't ever feel like I pigeonhole anybody into just being really good at one event. I want all of you to be really good at racing, and then we kind of pick our event at the end of the season type of thing. And so, you and Kelly and Alyssa and Hastings could all run pretty much anything from the 800 to the 10K, and then with you and Kelly down into the 500, right? You both were school record holders at one point in time and in the 500, and now you're a school record holder in the 10K. And so I think that's part of it too, is that I think, we do things to get you ready to run really fast in your primary event, but I also just want you to be really good at racing. So
I want to complete the story on Alyssa there. She did qualify to nationals with the 501 and then did All-American with the 459.
Right. And so, and honestly, she was a defending conference champ in the 5K and the 3K and went to conference and won the mile and the 1,000 against a very good All-American from Mount Union in the 1,500. And then went to nationals and was the last one into the final and ended up being eighth at the national meet and was an All-American in the mile indoors, which is a really cool story for sure. And honestly, once again at the beginning part of the year, our Who, What, When, Where had her running the 3K and the 5K at a national championship.
Absolutely. Because I think there's also like a confidence that comes off of like running those off events or off events after hard week that like builds. Like I think about her at Sparky then an outdoor running a stupid fast 800. Like would she run 2:14, 2:16, something?
She ran 17:26 on Friday night and then ran 2:16 on Saturday.
And that's the week of Sparky where we have a giant workout. Like there's something too about like confidence that comes out of that weekend of doubling, hitting those times, running something you're uncomfortable. That there's something that like accumulates in that sense too, of doing something that's successfully that's out of your comfort zone. That's not a traditional what we do. I think something too. Good.
I'm good. Keep talking.
Okay. That is unique about us is we run those weird events, but we run them earlier on in the season. So it's not like I'm running a 10K the week before conference for the first time ever. We talk sometimes about we run those fun things, or those obscure events earlier on in the season, and then we get more focused in. Like you said, you look at what's there at the end of the season, so it's not like we're running some crazy offhand event 2 weeks from conference. Those are the first couple meets of the season where we're trying to kind of offset some of the, again, confidence thing of what the expectations are at the time. But
I always think back to my first year at DePauw. That summer was when I ran 3:45 for the first time. That next winter, and even the winter going into that, I felt like I was pretty fit and I was doing some pretty good workouts and I was running more miles than I had ever run before in my life. And I kept running 4:16 and 4:14. I'm like, I'm not that. Like, I am a 4:06 miler. Why am I running 10 seconds slower? And then I realized that because I wasn't doing faster stuff and I wasn't tuned up and I wasn't racing it as much. And if I would race it a couple times, I would start to get better as I would go. And, and so a lot of the things that we do are based off my background in history and kind of what kind of worked for me a little bit in some senses. But not everybody that runs the 10K runs the next weekend either. Some of it depends on how they recover from that and how they're feeling. And
there are exceptions.
There are exceptions to everything. There are some kids that they don't want to run those off events. They just want to run their event every single weekend. It's not usually our top kids, but there are kids on the team that they just want to run 5Ks and 10Ks. And okay, well, you're going to have to take some weekends off in there. Well, that's fine. Okay. And so we will do some of those things, but I think the majority of the group kind of is on pace with what we've been talking about.
I think it's even a little bit of a culture thing that people don't mind riding the off events because it gets you on the bus. It gets you to the meet to go and be there. Just because you're in an off week or like a off event week doesn't mean one of your teammates isn't getting after something hard at that meet. Like different meets set up for different people. So it's fun to be there sometimes. But
I think the other piece is racing is fun. That's the fun part. Like, you guys are not professional athletes that only race 6 times all year and have these very detailed training sessions set up to just get ready for these specific events. That's not what we're doing. And a lot of kids go to college because they enjoy racing and they want to do it. And so I think it is a culture thing, and it's something I talk about in recruiting. And, I think the people that want to get super fancy with it do, and they don't race as often. And that's fine. We'll see at conference and we'll see who comes out on top. And that's the fun part of it, is that we can get to see it is our culture versus their culture, especially at a conference meet type of thing. And we've had a lot of success. And there are other teams that have had success off of the way that they do it with their groups at specific points in time. And but I really feel like when we get a group that buys into what we're doing, we are pretty darn successful when we show up to conference and nationals.
You think racing's fun, so you can talk. You
Oh,
can
yeah.
talk on that.
I am definitely one that I enjoy racing, enjoy doing the different events, and I enjoy the strength that it does give you and the confidence. Like you guys talking about the Sparky meet for outdoors and doing the real hard workout that week, and it is hard to race off of that. But I mean, I'm someone who then went that weekend. I raced the 15, 8, and 4x4. I ended up PRing in all 3, and that gave me confidence going then. A week or so later into the conference meet, knowing the first day I have to run a 10K, running out my PR and then knowing I have a 5K the next day and then PRing in the 5K the next day. And it's like, that's things that, I mean, I know other people in the conference, they might have got me in the 10K the day before, but then coming back in the 5K the next day, I beat them and they were like, I don't know how you race so well. It's like, that's just something we do. That's just something we do. And that's part of our program. Just not just being the workout warriors where you can only do workouts really well and occasionally you get a good race in, but then battling back and racing all 2 days in a row, especially in like 2 distance events. And then even for myself then after having a pretty tough conference week, usually taking like if you run a 10K off the next weekend, but then for me then within a week turning around and having a massive PR and breaking 15 in the 5K the following week, it just shows like our culture and like the strength that you can build. The more you do race, your body just has to adapt. You force your body to adapt.
I think even like just on the topic of culture, it's interesting to think about Abby Collier running 6 events at conference for us. Like, you don't get sprinter of the meet for running 2 events.
Right.
You don't get distance runner of the meet for running 1 event. Like, that's not how it works. And I think it's something when we talk about like culture and setting people apart, it's not just us. Our sprinters are on the line. Our throwers are out there every weekend. And give and take a little bit of flexibility with them, but there's just something like different. I even think outside of us, Faith Duncan this past weekend at conference ran DMR mile, 3K, 5K. They want to be one of like the greatest. They race like in our conference at our level, at the D3 level, at the OAC level. Like when it comes to conference meet time, like who shows up all the way back to when Kelly, like it's people who race the multiple events at conference. It just sets you apart. I don't know. Like,
I think Abby's also a unique instance because Abby spent a lot of time around us too.
Yeah.
And she's gone on all of these road trips with us and she does ask a lot of questions. And I think we've had these conversations with her, and that's something that she has obviously built up to because she was a lot more fragile as a freshman and a sophomore. And so, but she still would run the 400 and run the DMR. And like, those are things that she was really excited to go do and try to help the team with. And so I do think that once again, that culture piece is a big part of it. And, especially with Coach Gallivan and Coach Johnson, like they've bought into that as well, that trying to get people to do more. Caden did a ton of events this past weekend. That's not something as a freshman that I think we would have gotten him to be able to do at that type of a level. And it meant a lot to him. Like, he really wanted to try to help the team score points. Like, that was a big deal for him and several of those guys to do that.
I guess I should probably explain what Abby did. She won the 200. She won the 60 with a school record. They won the 4x2, and they set the OAC record in the 4x2. She got 3rd in the 400, and then led off our 4x4 that got 2nd. And then she came back the next weekend and ran 2 more PRs in the 60, breaking the school record again. PR'd again for this season in the 200, and then we set the school record in the 4x4.
Yeah.
That, like, the volume and prelims and add all that in. What she did, I guess. I just want to, people who don't know, it was a big deal. But absolutely. We've talked a little bit about the benefits of the racing. What about like the way it shifts our focus from time sometimes of learning how to actually race, and the significance that does and that adds versus the being so focused on a time when you're only getting on the line to quick hit a qualifying mark that week, and how that kind of plays. I think about Sam Sikorsky is a great example of somebody who races well, almost to like a fault. That, I don't know, the way that plays out, I guess, on our team.
Yeah, I think I talked about this in one of the other podcasts that I actually stopped asking this question to recruits because I was getting so frustrated. All anybody cares about right now is times. And I think about myself, and I was a competitive runner at our conference level 20 years ago. I was a competitive runner at the national level, being an All-American once 20 years ago. My times would not even come close to making the national meet now. And so even my PRs are starting to become fairly obsolete. And I feel like 3:45 is still pretty fast. Like a 4:01 mile is still a pretty fast mile. And so it frustrates me that kids are more concerned with time than they are place, because I will always be an All-American, even though my 3:54 at the time I thought was hot shit isn't anymore, because things are getting faster. And so I am a big believer that if you get really good at racing and you get really fit, that you will eventually be in a race where you are going to get an opportunity to run really fast. And if you're really good at racing, you're going to just go out and race and try to beat people, and that time will eventually happen. And I think that's where a lot of our group ends up having their best races, is when they take the chance and put themselves out there and just go with it, and they don't worry about the time. And we're always giving splits, and I have a whole entire crapper hopper that's filled with note cards, and so those things are what's that?
Cropper hopper.
Those things
Dating yourself.
those things are important, but they're important to understand how the race played out. There are times where we will be driving back from national meets and people will be giving me play-by-play and giving me splits, or I can just sit and watch splits through results, and I know what is happening during the race, and I can almost watch the race in my head. And so it's important to make sure that you're understanding where your fitness level is and running to your fitness level, but then putting yourself in a position to use that fitness to have really big things happen if you can do that. So I don't know if that kind of got at it or not, but
I think something you told me a lot senior year, especially like in cross country. I like the racing. I always love the racing of cross country more. And then for me, I was trying to be all region at the regional meet. And you always told me, like, if you want to be all region, this is the pack you need to run with. These are the guys you need to run with and the guys you need to beat. Like, you're never going to be able to, we're at the level where you can't go out easy and chase everybody down. People are just too good for that, especially the group I was trying to run with. So it was always like, if you want to figure out how to race, you want to figure out how to be in that mix of guys and racing with them and beat them, like you have to put yourself in the position with them. You need to attach yourself in that group. Don't give yourself an option not to go with that group, and just you figure out how to race pretty well from there when you throw yourself in it. And then all of a sudden people are like, who's this person? And then all of a sudden you're running with them every week and they're like, this guy, like, you can race, you know? So
I think about the predictability of it that you talk about. Like, we laughed at the conference meet. I got lane 1. I don't know how many times I've ended up in sticker number 1. And the strategy to run from sticker number 1, from sticker number 8 or 6 is very different. Your first lap, it completely changes your first lap. Whether you're in the inside alley on the 800, like, do you have to plan for a cut-in in your visualization and different things like that? That stuff comes more naturally the more you do it. It's the first time I remember being a freshman with sticker number 1 in the prelim of the national meet in the 1500. I was like, what on earth am I supposed to do? Like, and I ended up leading it. But the more you do that stuff, the more natural it's kind of become an inside joke almost. But I think about then the next year we went back and we watched races. That's what we did the night before, was we went and watched races of who has had my hip sticker, where'd they end up, and using the pattern of that. And the more you see that, the more you experience that, the better. And that is what we did. That was how I figured it out, was we went and watched, what did they do last year? How can I put myself in her shoes? What did she do? And it was a little bit different, but it worked. I got to finals. But I think it's something we talked about last year, too, when you were looking at the 5K and watching videos in the spring. And I was like, who are you watching in the race? And you were like, well, the guy that leads it the whole time. I said, are you going to lead it the whole time? You were like, no. I said, then why are you watching the guy that leads it the whole time? Find a video where the guy who's leading it doesn't win it. Because you're like, well, he wins it. Like, he wins this. Well, then that's not the video you need to be watching. Like, trying to find a race that fits. And, again, the more experience, the better. It all goes around and around.
Yeah, and that's starting to get into the mental prep of racing and, you know, all of that kind of stuff.
But just the more you're in the races, the
Yep.
more you see that stuff.
Yep.
But it helps with your mental prep. It helps to visualize if you've been at that track before, but you've never raced that track before. Like, I don't know. It's interesting.
I think the more you race, the more you kind of figure out where you need to be in certain positions at certain points and times during the race, and where your strengths and weaknesses are, and you can try different things out. You know, I told the story of the conference meet with Seha and Sorensen and those guys in the 1500, and Seha didn't have a kick, and he ended up being second, so I misquoted it during the previous story, but you know, they went through the first lap really slow, and that was my instructions to him was, dude, you got to take this. Like, you got to be out front. You have to be the guy pushing the pace, making everybody else work, because he just didn't have the foot speed, and especially if it came down to a kick between him and Sorensen and him and David Perry. Like, so you just have to know what you need to do in those moments. And I do think there are times to go time trial and just sit in the group and just hold on for dear life, and you just put yourself in there and see what you can do the last 300 meters or whatever. But that's not always how championship racing plays out. And so once again, if you're running 3 1500s all season and all of them are these big time trials, and then you go to conference and it goes out slow and you start to panic, what are you going to do? Like, whereas if you've gone and run some smaller meets and had to, you know, we'll talk about that. We'll say, okay, hey, just sit in and race for the first 800 and then see what you can do from there, or, you know, just sit in and race till the last lap, or, you know, we'll have different strategies. And part of that is I'm trying to set you guys up to run at conference or at nationals, and what that environment can be like with a bunch of people all on top of each other that can run the same times. Because it's different. It's different.
And it's that common theme through most of these episodes of that, like, mentality to win. Like, I think about my junior year that was not going well, and you threw me in the Walsh meet, a tune-up meet for the conference meet, and you're like, I don't care what time you run, just go win. Like,
Yep.
I want you to just go win and count it in that column. Like, put
Yep.
a tally and move on. We're not going to talk about the times. We're not going to talk about the competition. I just want you to win a race going into conference, and, like, to have that option and to mess with that. And I still tried to complain about the time, but, like, at the end of the day, we did what we needed to do to get me ready for the conference meet the next week. You can't do that in practice. Like, you can't really account for a win in a practice.
Yeah. My junior year indoors, I struggled immensely with trying to run times and trying to hit times and trying to hit splits and trying to recreate the year before when everything just came easy. And I got to the point after I got beat at the conference meet that I was just going to go back to winning. That was my goal. I was going to try to win every single race that I ran outdoors, and I did all but like 4 races, and 2 of them were the national meet. One of them was the last chance meet where the guy that was the D2 national runner-up barely outkicked me. And throughout the whole season, I remember my coaches being like, well, you're not running fast. You're not running fast. I'm like, but I feel better. Like, and I'm winning races and I'm closing really hard. And then all of a sudden at the conference meet, I got into a race where we went out a little bit harder and I was able to close and I won. And then we went to the last chance meet and we went through 63, 206, 309, and I ended up closing in like 40 whatever seconds at the end of that thing. And ran 351 or 2 and punched my ticket to the national meet. And a lot of that just came back to, I just put myself in it, and I put myself in a lot of different situations. Like, I went to Hillsdale at the Gina relays, and I wasn't in the fast heat, but I still won my heat, and I ran 401. And my coach was like, we came all the way up here. I'm like, but I just won a heat at the Gina relays. It's not my fault I wasn't in the fast heat. Like, I did what I could with that race, and I ran faster than anybody else in that race. And I think that does become a mindset, because my junior year, the year before, junior indoor year anyways, I was fifth year senior. When I was an All-American, I was winning a lot of races. And so when I went to the national meet, there was a point where the kid that led went out really fast and then threw the brakes on 400 meters in. And I just went by him and went into the lead. I'd led every race that I had run mostly up to that point. And so I felt comfortable being in the lead no matter who was there and just doing my thing and running my race. Little naive being my first national meet, but I ended up coming away with an All-American and still beat some pretty good guys in that. And I don't know that I could have done much else in that situation. I don't know that I had the wheels that those guys had at that particular point in time. So,
I guess the last thing kind of going off of that, you're talking about like experience and naiveness and adjusting, is just, we've danced around it, but like officially kind of touching on that, like when you go week to week that you get to actually adjust, like not going out too fast, not going out too slow, like that it gives you that time and that grace to adjust. I know, Carter, you talk about this a lot, especially in the 5K, of not just running it once or twice a season gives you the like ability to kind of tweak from one week to the next. And how do you do that? I guess I don't know, you talk about that a lot.
It really started in cross, but the 5K was pretty applicable too. Like, we'd figure out, like, okay, we'll start making our moves, like, for the 8K. Like, okay, let's make our move 6K at the 6K mark. And then each week we're like, see if we can move it closer back, like 1K. Towards the end of the season, it was, you're going through, you're hitting the 3K mark. And then all of a sudden, that's when, without a doubt, that's when the gap separates. And that's when that you decide, you have to make the decision if, are you going to be tough today? Are you going to go with that top group? Or are you going to chill back and then just lead that next group and see what happens? But then just like each week you can find your different adjustment points. And then each week, especially because we end up racing a lot of the same teams similar times, you can see then yourself, even if you weren't beating some of these people, a John Carroll guy or Heidelberg or some of those guys, like if you weren't beating them at the beginning of the season, all of a sudden you're beating them at the end of the season. And they're like, well, how is this guy like I was beating him the first 3 meets of the season, but it's like you have found your adjustments to where you're now beating guys that quote unquote you shouldn't have been beating or something like that. You just figure out what adjustments you need to make like in the race, and you figure out when people make their moves and when you need to make your move. And as someone who does not have a kick, you have to find out, okay, well, if I need to finish in this top 20 in a race, like I need to be moving faster, like earlier in the race than these other guys do, because they're going to close that gap. So how big of a gap can I make before they make their move in that? So you do get the chance, and you can kind of do it even instead of running a 5K, you can do it in a 3K where you can figure out like, we're already running a faster pace. Let's see how can we apply this in a 3K instead of a 5K. We're already running hard. Let's see if we can still make that move a mile out and see how that translates for us. So.
And I try to do that with the notes and stuff that I write. Is we're trying to build as the season goes on, and we're trying to get ready to run really well at the end of the season. And then, once we get to conference, it's just we gotta let it rip. You gotta put yourself in a position to score. You gotta put yourself in a position to win, and just go be gritty, because that's really what it comes down to when it's all said and done, is who's willing to hurt the most. And so once again, the more times that you can put yourself through that, and the more times that we can kind of keep taking steps forward. And I think to kind of come all the way full circle, that's where the who, what, when, where really kind of comes into play, is setting up what we're trying to work on and how we're trying to finish races. And we're always trying to finish hard. And so that's why we always run 4x4s at the end of meets, because you need to run hard when you're really tired at the end of these races, because the last lap of a 5K doesn't feel very good. Neither does the last lap of an 800. Neither does the last lap of a 1500. Neither does the last lap of a steeple or a 10K. And so learning to deal with that discomfort and understanding that I can run fast at the end of everything that we do is another really important piece to it. But just being comfortable while being uncomfortable, and learning that you can still run fast at the end of that. And I really like the point that you said. It comes down to that decision point. There can be multiple of those decision points during a race. And you have to learn to just go with it. And the more times that you do that, the better. It is a mental muscle that you can build. And so that it's something that you have to work on, and being able to say yes in those moments takes a hot minute. And that's once again, I don't know if there are coaches out there that are just really good at creating those in workouts better than I am. But I think that is something that you just cannot replicate in a workout. No matter how hard the workout is, you just can't replicate that in a workout.
That was something that was talked about, like, senior year cross-country season, like, trying to talk to Hope about, like, you've been very successful at regional and national meets and stuff for cross. And I was like, I wanted to be at that point. And the conversation we had was, like, you cannot give yourself the option to say no. If you give yourself the option to say no, like, 9 times out of 10, your body wants you to take it.
Yep.
So, like you said, like, you have to put yourself in the position where you cannot say no. Put yourself in a spot where you have to say yes. And if that's literally throwing yourself in the middle of the pack, to where if you say no, you're probably going to get tripped and trampled in a cross-country race, you can't say no. You have to go with that group. So, in racing, that's just, you only give yourself the option to say yes and make that move.
I just think back to your 5K at Twilight when you broke 15 minutes, right? 3K to 4K is when that race is made. That is when you figure out whether you're going to break 15 minutes or not. Because anybody can run 3 minutes or 2:59 for the last K, but can you run 3 minutes from 3K to 4K? Because you can run 9 flat. We know you can run 9 flat. You can run sub 9. But that is that moment. And it's the same with the third lap of the 1500. It's the same with the third 200 of the 800. It's the same, it's the same for every race. But ultimately, making that decision at that point is really what we're trying to get after here. And if you can do that in a 1500, the likelihood on the third lap, the likelihood that you're going to do that from 3K to 4K of the 5K the next week is probably going to go up. And it's going to feel different, a little different. But once again, hardening yourself to that is really what we're trying to get after.
As we kind of circle in and wrap this up, I think about, as an athlete in a program that races every weekend, the way I kind of see it is it's an opportunity. It's a constant opportunity, whether it's to learn something new, whether it's to try something different. And we're not against time trialing. I think about how many times we've set up a pacing situation. And I always think back to, when I think about us racing constantly, is a week that a lot of people take off is that week before indoor conference. And I have, with just me and a pacer and maybe a couple of people on the track, qualified to national meet 3 times out of that weekend. And that's a weekend most people don't race. And I've run 2:10 twice then, in my first official sub 5 mile. That's a weekend that people usually throw away, or use it as a tune-up for conference. And it's an opportunity we take advantage of. So I said it in the comparison episode of every time we get on the line, it is a chance to qualify to the conference. It is a chance to qualify to the national meet. Even if we don't use it for that, we're using it for something. And even if it's just to have fun, like you talked about, people just want to race.
Yep.
So as an athlete, that's how I guess I kind of view our program and why I'm thankful for it. But I guess we've talked about a lot of different things, maybe 3 of the top 3 benefits of racing every weekend. Or what you see as most valuable.
Yeah, I think building the routine, I think becoming mentally hardened to the efforts that you're going to need to do, and then learning the different racing skills that you're going to need are probably the 3 most important things.
And then, unless you have another thing, I'm going to add
Go ahead.
something that to build into the training that sets us up for success in that sense. What is a kind of, in order to be able to race every weekend, what's something we have to kind of have built in?
I don't know. I don't know if I've just kind of come up with this organically, because there are a lot of weeks where we just kind of train through, and we have our pattern of workouts that we do, and we'll mix it up from time to time and we'll throw different wrinkles in. But we have our 2 times during the year where we do a 10-day out effort and we try to get after it. And then we have other days where we're trying to accomplish different things. And I just think we just always kind of just stay the course with ultimately trying to run really fast this weekend, this upcoming weekend, and the last weekend in February. So conference and nationals. And then ultimately we're trying to run really fast in May. That is what everything is trying to build towards throughout the entire year. From workouts to races to everything, we are trying to run as fast as we possibly can in May. And we tweak things to get you ready for the different peaks and valleys of the season. But I think there are benefits to that. And what I was going to mention earlier and kind of just popped into my head, and I probably should have brought this up at the beginning of everything. I raced every weekend in college. Holman didn't believe in taking weekends off. Like, we didn't take weekends off in cross country. We didn't take weekends off in track. I think there was one year I counted up that I raced like 50 some times, like 50 some different races throughout the year. It might even been higher than that if I'd have to go back and look. So that's part of it too, is like, that's just kind of where I come from. But, you know, Basista also came from Holman, and Ford also came from Holman, kind of. But they don't do some of those same things either. So there are parts of me that kind of really liked what we did when I was in college, and I think it worked really well. And so I continue to do those things now.
Yeah.
So.
You got anything else, Carter?
Nope, I'm good.
Appreciate you listening in. Hopefully you made it this far. Probably not going to do the
Sorry, Anthony.
the real quick questions at the end, because I think this is already going to be about an hour. So appreciate y'all. We'll see you soon.